Have you ever been kicked out of your childhood home by your own mother? The one person who should protect you above all others? I thought I'd lost everything the night she chose her new husband over me, changing the locks on the house my father built with his bare hands, the house where his workshop still smelled of sawdust and varnish, the house filled with memories they were so eager to erase, but they made one crucial mistake. They never checked who actually owned it. And when the truth came out, the real battle for my father's legacy began. My name is Hannah Porter, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a software engineer at Northbridge Technologies in Portland, debugging code and building systems that keep companies running. But before I learned to build digital architectures, my father taught me to build with my hands, to understand the bones of a house, the grain of wood, the weight of a hammer. My father, Robert Porter, was the kind of man who could look at a crumbling Victorian mansion and see its future glory. He started Porter Restorations with nothing but a borrowed truck and an unshakable belief that old things deserved to be saved. Over 30 years, he built his company from the ground up, specializing in restoring historic homes throughout the Pacific Northwest. His hands, rough and scarred from decades of work, could coax beauty from rotting timber and make 100-year-old staircases sing again. Our home was his masterpiece, a 1920s craftsman bungalow he'd rescued from demolition when I was 5. I remember watching him work on it every weekend, teaching me the difference between oak and pine, showing me how to read the age of a house in its foundation stones, the wide front porch with its tapered columns, the built-in bookcases with their leaded glass doors, the coffered ceilings. Every detail had been lovingly restored by his hands. But it was his workshop in the converted garage that held my heart. The walls were lined with tools he'd collected over decades, each one with its own story. The workbench, scarred and stained, where he taught me to measure twice and cut once, the pegboard where his grandfather's hand planes hung next to modern power tools, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil that seemed to have seeped into the very walls. Even now, I can close my eyes and hear the steady rhythm of his breathing as he worked, punctuated by the whisper of sandpaper against wood. Dad wasn't just teaching me carpentry in that workshop. He was teaching me about legacy, about the things we leave behind that matter more than money. Buildings outlive us. Hannah, he'd say, running his hand along a perfectly joined corner, when you put your heart into something solid, something real, it stands long after you're gone. 3 months before his sudden death, Dad called me into his study. He'd been acting strange for weeks, organizing papers, labeling file boxes, updating contact lists. I thought he was just being his meticulous self, preparing for tax season. But that evening, he pulled out a manila envelope from his desk drawer and placed it in my hands. "This stays between us," he said, his brown eyes serious behind his reading glasses. "Your mother, she's a wonderful woman, but she's too trusting, too quick to see the good in people. This house, Hannah, it's yours. The deed, the will, everything, it's all in your name, properly filed and notarized." I tried to protest, confused why he was excluding Mom, but he held up his hand. "I've made sure she's taken care of. The life insurance, the business assets, our savings. She'll want for nothing. But this house, this is my legacy to you. Promise me you'll protect it." 6 weeks later, he was gone. A massive heart attack at a job site, trying to lift a beam that should have taken 3 men to move. The doctor said he was gone before he hit the ground. Quick, painless, but devastating for those of us left behind. I stood in his workshop the day after the funeral, surrounded by his half-finished projects, a jewelry box for Mom's birthday, a rocking horse for the neighbor's new grandchild, each piece waiting for hands that would never return. I picked up his favorite hammer, its handle worn smooth by decades of use, and made a silent promise. I would protect what he'd built. I would honor his legacy. I had no idea that promise would mean standing against my own mother. The weeks after Dad's death blurred together like watercolors in the rain. Mom, Linda, seemed to age 10 years overnight. She'd sit in Dad's leather chair, wearing his old flannel shirt, staring at nothing. She stopped cooking, stopped answering the phone, stopped being the vibrant woman who used to sing while tending her garden. I moved back home temporarily, taking remote workdays to be with her, watching her drift through the house like a ghost. It was Pastor Williams who suggested the grief support group at First Presbyterian. Linda needs to be around others who understand, he told me after finding her crying in the church parking lot one Sunday. Isolation makes grief heavier. I drove her to that first meeting on a rainy Tuesday evening. The church basement smelled of old coffee and new paint. Folding chairs arranged in a circle under fluorescent lights. There were 7 others there, widows and widowers at various stages of loss, clutching tissues and ceramic coffee mugs with Bible verses. That's where she met Mark Benson. He was 55, with silver hair and the kind of tan that suggested golf courses rather than construction sites. His wife had died of cancer 8 months earlier, he said, his voice breaking just enough to seem genuine. He wore an expensive watch and drove a pristine BMW. Details I noticed, but Mom didn't seem to care about. She was drawn to his sadness, to the way he nodded when she talked about the empty space in the bed, the silence where conversation used to be. At first, I was grateful. Mark got Mom talking again. They'd have coffee after meetings, and she'd come home with a faint smile, telling me about his stories from his days in medical equipment sales, his travels to Europe, his plans to retire early. He understands, she'd say. He knows what it's like to lose your other half. 3 months in, she started wearing lipstick again. 4 months, she was laughing at his jokes during group sessions. By month 5, they were having dinner together twice a week. I told myself this was healthy, that Dad would want her to find happiness again. But something about Mark set off alarm bells I couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was the way his grief seemed to switch on and off like a light, or how his stories about his late wife were vague, almost rehearsed. 6 months after Dad's death, Mom announced they were officially dating. I know it seems fast, she said, twisting her wedding ring, which she still wore. But when you're our age, you realize how precious time is. Robert would understand. He'd want me to be happy. Would he? I wondered, remembering Dad's warning about her being too trusting. But I swallowed my doubts and smiled. If he makes you happy, Mom. Mark began appearing at family dinners, inserting himself into conversations about Dad's business, asking questions about the house's restoration, commenting on what he would have done differently. That workshop could be so much more functional, he said one evening, peering into Dad's sacred space. All those old tools just collecting dust. You could put in a proper gym, maybe a media room. My stomach clenched, but Mom just laughed. Oh, Mark, you and your modern ideas. He started small, leaving a toothbrush in the guest bathroom, a change of clothes in the closet. Then came the suggestions. Linda, that wallpaper in the dining room is so dated. Those old wood floors must be impossible to maintain. Why keep all these dusty antiques? Mom, still floating in her new romance haze, agreed to small changes. The antique mirror in the hallway was replaced with something brighter. Dad's collection of restoration books was boxed up to make room. Each change was a small betrayal, but I bit my tongue. Mom seemed happy, lighter. Who was I to destroy that? The real shift came when Mark mentioned his children during a Sunday dinner. Jason and Melissa have been struggling since their mother passed, he said, cutting into Mom's pot roast. Jason lost his apartment, the economy, and Melissa, poor thing, she's between jobs. They're both staying at my condo, but it's cramped. Mom's face softened with sympathy. Oh, Mark, you should have said something sooner. Well, he said, reaching for her hand, I was thinking, this house has so much space. I watched Mom's face transform with understanding and something else. Hope? Purpose? Of course, she said. We have 3 empty bedrooms. They could stay here while they get back on their feet. Mom, I started, but she was already planning, already seeing a full house, a new family. Mark smiled at me over his wine glass, and for the first time, I saw calculation in his eyes. This wasn't about grief or loneliness or finding love again. This was about something else entirely. This was about taking what my father had built. Mark moved in on a Saturday, 8 months after Dad's death. He arrived with a U-Haul and his 2 adult children in tow. Jason was 28, unemployed, with the soft look of someone who'd never held a hammer or pushed a lawnmower. Melissa, 25, dragged designer luggage up the porch steps while complaining about the rustic neighborhood. They took over the guest rooms like an invading army, spreading their belongings with casual disregard for the space's history. The changes started immediately. I came home from work the following Monday to find Jason had commandeered Dad's workshop. My father's carefully organized tools were shoved into corners, his workbench pushed against the wall to make room for a weight bench and protein shake station. The pegboard of hand planes, 3 generations of craftsmen's tools, lay propped against the garbage bins. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my hands shaking as I rescued my great-grandfather's block plane from the pile. Jason shrugged, earbuds in, barely glancing up from his phone. "Mark said I could set up my gym here. This old junk was just taking up space." "This old junk belongs to my family." "Well, we're family now, aren't we?" He smirked, returning to his bicep curls. I stormed into the house to find Mom in the kitchen with Mark, both looking at flooring samples. "Mom, Jason's destroying Dad's workshop." She sighed, that new expression she'd developed lately, part exhaustion, part avoidance. "Honey, we need to make room for everyone. Those tools haven't been touched in months." "Because Dad died, that doesn't mean—" "Hannah," Mark's voice cut through mine, authoritative. "Your mother and I are trying to blend our families here. That requires compromise from everyone." "Compromise? He's throwing away 3 generations of tools." Mom touched my arm, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Sweetheart, Mark has a point. We can't live in the past forever. Robert would want us to move forward." The betrayal stung worse than a slap. Dad would want his workshop respected. "Your father is gone," Mark said firmly. "This is our home now." Our home. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Over the next weeks, the assault on Dad's legacy accelerated. The built-in bookcases he'd spent months restoring were painted white. "Brightens the space," Melissa declared. The original hardwood floors in the dining room, which Dad had salvaged from a demolished church and installed himself, were covered with cheap laminate. "Easier to maintain," Mark insisted. The leaded glass windows in the den were replaced with vinyl. "Energy efficient," he explained to Mom, who nodded along like a marionette. Every protest I made was met with the same response from Mom. "Hannah, you need to accept the changes. Mark knows what he's doing." The workshop transformation was complete within a month. Dad's sanctuary became Jason's personal gym and hangout space, complete with neon signs and a mini fridge stocked with energy drinks. The sawdust smell was replaced by the stench of gym socks and stale beer. One evening, I found Mom standing in the doorway of the workshop, a strange expression on her face. "It looks so different," she said softly. "We could still restore it," I said hopefully. "I saved most of Dad's tools in my apartment. We could—" "No," she shook her head, the moment of softness gone. "Mark says we need to embrace the future, not cling to the past." Mark says, I repeated bitterly. "What do you say, Mom? What do you want?" She turned to me, and for a moment, I saw confusion in her eyes. I want everyone to be happy. I want us to be a family. We were a family, you, me, and Dad. That family is broken. Hannah, can't you see I'm trying to build something new?" The conversation that shattered everything came 3 weeks later. Mark had called a family meeting in what used to be Dad's study, now converted into his home office. He sat behind Dad's desk like he'd earned it, with Mom beside him and Jason and Melissa lounging on the leather couch. "We need to discuss the house situation," Mark began, fingers steepled. "For tax and legal purposes, it would be beneficial to have everything in Linda's and my name, cleaner, simpler." "The house is already in my name," I said quietly. "Dad left it to me." The room went silent. Mom's face went white. "What?" Mark's composure cracked slightly. "That's impossible. Spouses inherit—" Dad set it up years ago. The deed is in my name. He filed everything properly. Hannah, Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Is this true? I nodded, watching Mark's face darken. Dad wanted to make sure the house stayed in the family, protected. From what? Mark stood, his calm facade dropping. From me? I've invested time and money into this place. Without my permission. Your permission? He laughed harshly. Listen, little girl, your mother and I are together now. What's hers is mine, and that includes making decisions about where we live. But it's not hers, it's mine. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Mom, hoping to see understanding, maybe even pride that Dad had trusted me. Instead, I saw something that broke my heart. She was looking at Mark, not me, and in her eyes was fear, not of him, but of losing him. We'll see about this, Mark said coldly. Linda, we need to speak privately. As I left the room, I heard Mom's voice, pleading, there must be a mistake. Robert wouldn't. Hannah must be confused. But I wasn't confused. I had the papers to prove it. The battle for my father's house had officially begun. The text came at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. 3 days after the family meeting, I was in my apartment, reviewing code for a Friday morning deployment, when my phone buzzed. Hannah, Mark and I have made a decision. You need to find somewhere else to live. This arrangement isn't working for our new family. You have 2 weeks to collect your things. I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding. My own mother was evicting me from the house I legally owned. My hands shook as I called her immediately. It rang once before going to voicemail. She'd declined my call. I drove over immediately, still in my pajamas and slippers. The November rain was coming down hard, and I forgot my umbrella in my rush. By the time I reached the front door, I was soaked. I fumbled for my key, the one Dad had made for me when I was 16, the one I'd carried for 18 years. It didn't fit. I stood there, rain streaming down my face, trying the key again and again. The lock had been changed. The porch light flicked on, and Mark appeared in the doorway, blocking the entrance to my own home. You got Linda's message, he said, not a question. This is my house. You can't. Can't I? He smiled coldly. Your mother has rights as a resident. She's asked you to leave. You're making her uncomfortable in her own home. Her home? It's my house. My father left it to me. Mom appeared behind him, wrapped in a robe I didn't recognize, probably one of the new things Mark had bought her. She wouldn't meet my eyes, staring at a point somewhere past my shoulder. Mom, please, look at me. She finally did, and what I saw there destroyed me. No warmth, no recognition of the daughter she'd raised, just cold determination and something else. Resentment? You've been selfish, Hannah, she said, her voice steady. Hoarding this house, making Mark and his children feel unwelcome. Your father would be ashamed. The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Dad would be ashamed? Dad left me this house because he knew. He knew nothing! Her composure cracked, revealing raw anger underneath. He made that decision without consulting me. 28 years of marriage, and he goes behind my back to give our home to you, and you kept it secret, both of you conspiring against me. Mom, it wasn't like that. I've made my choice. Hannah, Mark makes me happy. His children respect me. They don't treat me like some fragile, stupid woman who can't make her own decisions. I never... You have 2 weeks to get your things. Only what's yours personally. Nothing from the house itself. Mark's hand appeared on her shoulder, possessive and comforting. Come inside, Linda. You'll catch cold. The door closed. I heard the deadbolt turn, a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the rain. I stood on that porch for 10 more minutes, soaked to the bone, trying to understand how I'd lost my mother completely. When I finally walked back to my car, I saw Jason watching from Dad's workshop window, holding one of Dad's vintage hammers like a trophy. He waved it at me mockingly before disappearing back inside. The next morning, I discovered the full extent of their campaign. My childhood bedroom had been stripped. Photo albums, my high school yearbooks, even my old jewelry box. Everything was piled in boxes in the garage. But Dad's things were worse. His restoration journals, filled with decades of notes and sketches, were stacked next to garbage bags. His architectural drawings for the house, the documentation of every beam and joint, were rolled up and rubber-banded with a tag that said, "Garage Sale." I arrived at the house Saturday morning to find Jason had set up tables on the lawn. He was selling Dad's tools, his books, even his personal effects. Neighbors were browsing through boxes of my father's life, picking up his drafting compass for 50 cents, his first edition architecture books for $1 each. "Everything must go," Jason called out cheerfully. "Moving sale. Great deals." Mrs. Patterson from next door was holding Dad's leather-bound project journal, the one where he documented the house restoration. "Hannah, I didn't know you were moving." "I'm not." "She is," Melissa interrupted, appearing with a cash box. "That'll be $5, Mrs. Patterson." I watched our elderly neighbor walk away with Dad's most precious professional possession, and something inside me snapped. But instead of exploding, I felt a cold clarity settle over me. I took out my phone and started recording. Jason selling Dad's tools, Melissa haggling over his books, Mark directing people to items worth far more than the asking price. That evening, alone in my apartment with the few boxes I'd managed to rescue, I opened the manila envelope Dad had given me months before. Inside, along with the deed and his will, was a handwritten letter I'd never read before. "My dearest Hannah, if you're reading this, then you're facing the challenge I hope to spare you from. I've watched your mother change over the years, becoming more influenced by others' opinions, more desperate for approval from the wrong people. I love her, but I don't trust her judgment when it comes to preserving what matters. This house is more than wood and stone. It's our family's legacy, built with honor and hard work. I'm trusting you to protect it, even if that means protecting it from those who should cherish it but don't. Be strong, be smart, and remember, the law is on your side. All my love, Dad." At the bottom was a business card. Dana Cole, estate attorney, specializing in property disputes. I made the call Monday morning. "Ms. Porter," Dana said after reviewing the documents, "they haven't just violated your property rights. They've committed theft, vandalism, and possibly fraud. You have an airtight case." "I don't want to drag this out," I said. "I just want them gone." She smiled, sharp and professional. "Oh, we can do better than that. We can make sure they never forget what happens when they steal from Robert Porter's daughter." The war was about to begin, and this time, I had the weapons to win. Dana Cole's office occupied the top floor of a restored Victorian building downtown, the kind of place Dad would have appreciated for its preserved crown molding and original hardwood. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a wall full of victory photos with grateful clients. "First things first," she said, spreading my documents across her mahogany desk. "Your ownership is ironclad. Your father did everything right. Deed transfer, title insurance, proper filing with the county. Mark and your mother have zero legal claim to this property. Then why do I feel like I'm the one who's been robbed? Because you have been, but here's what they don't know. Every unauthorized change they've made, every item they've sold, every day they've prevented you from accessing your property is actionable. We're going to document everything and build a case that will make their heads spin." We spent 3 hours crafting a strategy. Dana was thorough, methodical, and brilliant. "We'll give them one chance to leave voluntarily before we file formal eviction proceedings, but first, we gather evidence." For the next 3 months, I became a ghost in my own life. I went to work, came home to my apartment, and quietly built my case. Every weekend, I drove past the house, photographing changes from the street. The new vinyl siding Mark installed over Dad's carefully maintained cedar shingles. The modern metal roof that replaced the period-appropriate tiles Dad had sourced from a demolition in Seattle. The cheap concrete pathway poured over Mom's heritage rose garden. I hired a private investigator who discovered interesting details about Mark's past: 3 previous marriages, 2 bankruptcies, and a pattern of moving in with wealthy widows. Nothing illegal, but certainly illuminating. Meanwhile, I cultivated relationships with the neighbors. Mrs. Patterson was horrified when I explained the situation. "I wondered why Linda seemed so different," she said. "She used to be such a lovely woman. Now she won't even make eye contact." The Nguyen's across the street had been documenting everything on their security cameras. "We thought it was strange," Mr. Nguyen said, pulling up footage on his laptop. "All these strangers coming and going, trucks hauling away furniture. Here, look, this is from last month." The video showed Jason and 2 friends loading Dad's antique drafting table into a pickup truck. Another showed Mark directing workers to tear out the original kitchen cabinets Dad had painstakingly restored. I also discovered something interesting at the county records office. Mark had tried to file paperwork claiming adverse possession, arguing that his improvements to the property gave him rights. The clerk had rejected it, noting that you can't claim adverse possession against the legal owner, but the attempt showed his intentions. Dana subpoenaed the garage sale records from online marketplaces where Jason had been selling items. Cross-referencing with photos from Dad's restoration journal, we identified over $30,000 worth of tools and materials sold without authorization. One buyer, a contractor from Beaverton, still had Dad's complete set of Japanese chisels. He agreed to testify about the purchase. The most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Melissa, not the brightest, had been bragging on social media. Instagram posts of her redecorating my childhood home, TikTok videos mocking the outdated restoration work, and most damningly, a Facebook post saying, "Can't wait until Mark gets that stupid girl's name off the deed so we can sell this dump and get a real house." I screenshot everything. During this time, Mom tried to contact me twice. The first was a voicemail. "Hannah, you're being unreasonable. If you'd just accept Mark, we could all be happy. Stop being so selfish." The second was a letter, delivered to my office. "Hannah, your father's death broke something between us. You chose him over me, keeping his secrets, enabling his control from beyond the grave. Mark has shown me what real partnership looks like. He includes me in decisions. He values my opinion. He doesn't hide things from me. If you continue this path, you'll lose more than a house. You'll lose your mother, Linda." I kept the letter. Dana said it would be useful to show her state of mind. 3 months of silence from my end had made them comfortable, complacent. Mark had started introducing himself to local contractors as the homeowner, getting quotes for a full renovation, essentially gutting Dad's life's work to flip the house for profit. He'd even met with a real estate agent, though she'd wisely refused to list without clear title. They thought I'd given up. Mom told her book club that I'd come to my senses and was giving them space to be happy. Mark boasted at the country club that he'd handled the situation. They had no idea what was coming. On a cold February morning, exactly 3 months after they'd locked me out, Dana filed the paperwork: formal eviction notice, charges of theft and vandalism, civil suit for damages, criminal complaint for fraud. But we didn't serve them immediately. First, Dana sent a single letter to Mom, delivered by courier to ensure she received it personally. "Mrs. Benson, you have 30 days to voluntarily vacate the property located at 42 Maple Street. All individuals currently residing there who are not the legal owner must remove themselves and their belongings. Any property damage will be assessed and billed accordingly. This is your only opportunity to resolve this matter without court involvement. Dana Cole, attorney representing Hannah Porter, legal owner." I waited at my apartment, phone in hand, knowing what was coming. It took exactly 18 minutes for Mom to call. The phone rang 18 times before I answered. I wanted her to feel what I'd felt standing in the rain, locked out and abandoned. "How could you?" Mom's voice was shrill, panicked. "How could you do this to your own mother?" "The same way you locked me out of my own house." "Hannah, please, you don't understand what you're doing. Mark is furious. He's talking about suing you for defamation, for harassment. Let him try. I have 3 months of evidence documenting theft and property damage. Would you like to know how much Dad's tools that Jason sold were actually worth? Silence, then a shaky breath. This will destroy me. Everyone will know. The church, the book club, the neighbors. They already know. Mom, they've been watching Mark tear apart Dad's work for months. The call ended with her sobbing and Mark's voice in the background, shouting about lawyers and lawsuits. Within hours, the family mobilization began. My phone exploded with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister in California. How dare you put your mother through this? Cousin Bradley. Just sell the house and split the money. Don't be greedy. Uncle Tom, Dad's brother, was the only supportive voice. Robert knew what he was doing. Stand your ground. Mark hired an attorney, some flashy guy named Richard Steele, who immediately filed a countersuit claiming tenant rights and demanding compensation for improvements to the property. The number he quoted was absurd, $150,000 for what amounted to destruction of historical architectural features. Social media became a battlefield. Jason posted constantly, calling me a psycho-entitled brat and sharing edited versions of family photos that made it look like I'd always been an outsider. Melissa made TikToks portraying me as a villain keeping a poor widow from happiness. They tagged my employer, my colleagues, anyone they could find connected to me professionally. But Dana had warned me this would happen. Let them rant, she said. Every post is evidence of harassment. Every lie is defamation. Keep documenting. The church community split. Pastor Williams tried to mediate, hosting a meeting in his office that became a disaster. Mark played the wounded stepfather, talking about trying to bring healing to a broken family while I was consumed by greed. Mom sat beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of martyrdom. When I presented the deed and evidence of the garage sale, several church members shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Henderson, who'd bought Dad's vintage level at Jason's sale for $2, looked particularly guilty. This isn't about money, I said firmly. This is about my father's legacy being destroyed by people who never knew him and don't respect what he built. Your father would want peace, Pastor Williams said gently. My father wanted the house protected. That's why he left it to me. Mark stood abruptly. This is pointless. We'll see you in court. The harassment escalated. My car tires were slashed in my apartment complex parking lot. No cameras. No proof it was them. But the timing was suspicious. Pizza deliveries I didn't order showed up at my office. Someone reported me to HR at work for mental instability, triggering a humiliating investigation that found nothing. Mom's campaign was more personal. She called my best friend Sarah, crying about how I'd chosen property over family. She told my ex-boyfriend that I'd always been selfish, even as a child. She even contacted my therapist's office, trying to get information about my mental state. 3 weeks into the 30-day notice, something shifted. The garage sale buyers started coming forward. Mr. Rodriguez, who'd bought Dad's router, learned about the situation from Mrs. Patterson and offered to return it. I had no idea, he said. Your father helped me fix my roof 10 years ago. I wouldn't have taken his tools if I'd known. 7 other buyers did the same. The contractor who'd bought the Japanese chisels not only agreed to testify, but offered to document all the damage to the house. What they did to those built-ins is criminal, he said, examining the painted-over woodwork. Your father was a master craftsman. This is like spray painting a Rembrandt. Local media picked up the story. Family feud over historic Portland home ran in the neighborhood paper. While they tried to stay neutral, the facts spoke for themselves. Mark's attempt to claim he was restoring the property fell apart when reporters saw before and after photos. The meeting that changed everything happened 5 days before the eviction deadline. Dana called me into her office, a smile playing at her lips. Mark's attorney just contacted me. They want to negotiate. Why? Remember that contractor who was going to testify? He found something interesting. when they tore out your dad's kitchen cabinets. They damaged a load-bearing wall. The city's been notified. There's now a stop work order on the house and potential fines for unpermitted structural changes. I felt a surge of vindication. How much trouble are they in? Enough that Mark's looking at significant financial liability. Plus, my investigator found something interesting. Mark never divorced his second wife. Technically, he's still married, which makes his relationship with your mother complicated. He's married? Has been for 12 years. His wife lives in Nevada. She was very interested to hear about his new living situation. The karma was so perfect. Dad might have orchestrated it from beyond. So what do they want? To leave quietly, no criminal charges, no civil suit, if they vacate immediately. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. No deal. They leave, and they pay for restoration. Every penny of damage. Dana's smile widened. I was hoping you'd say that. Shall we counteroffer? The final battle was about to begin. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. It was standing room only. Neighbors, church members, relatives from both sides, and local reporters filled every available space. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It had become a community spectacle. Mark entered with his attorney, still projecting confidence in his expensive suit. Mom followed, wearing black like she was in mourning, clutching Mark's arm. Jason and Melissa flanked them, trying to look victorious but unable to hide their nervousness. They hadn't expected this to go to trial. They'd thought I'd fold. Judge Catherine Morrison presided, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. Dana had smiled when we'd learned she'd be our judge. She hates property fraud, she'd said, and she really hates people who destroy historical homes. Mark's attorney, Richard Steele, went first, painting me as a vindictive daughter punishing her mother for finding happiness. He claimed Mark's improvements had increased the property value, that I'd abandoned the home, and that Mom had a spousal right to the property despite the deed. This is a family dispute that should be resolved within the family, Steele concluded. Not in a courtroom. Dana stood slowly, commanding the room's attention. Your Honor, this isn't a family dispute. This is theft, fraud, and destruction of property. I'd like to present evidence. She started with the deed, the will, the letter from Dad, established my sole ownership beyond doubt. Then came the surveillance footage, the garage sale records, the social media posts. The courtroom gasped when she showed Melissa's Facebook post about selling this dump. The defendants didn't just occupy Ms. Porter's property illegally, Dana said. They systematically destroyed architectural features that took decades to restore. They sold family heirlooms and professional tools worth tens of thousands of dollars, and they did it while knowing they had no legal right to the property. The contractor testified about the damage, showing photos that made several people in the gallery wince. 30 years of restoration work, destroyed in 3 months, he said. It's heartbreaking. Mrs. Patterson took the stand, describing the garage sale. Jason was laughing about selling the old man's junk. He said Hannah was too sentimental to appreciate prime real estate. Then came the bombshell. Dana called Patricia Benson to the stand, Mark's legal wife from Nevada. She testified via video link, explaining how Mark had abandoned her 12 years ago, cleaned out their bank accounts, and disappeared. I hired a private investigator to find him, Patricia said. Imagine my surprise learning he was playing house with another woman in Portland. The courtroom erupted. Mom's face went white, then red. She turned to Mark, who was frantically whispering to his attorney. The judge called for order. When Mark took the stand, his composure was gone. He stumbled through explanations, claimed he thought the divorce was final, insisted his improvements were beneficial, but Dana destroyed him with his own words, playing a recording from a contractor where Mark described his plans to gut this old dump and flip it for $1 million. Mom's testimony was painful to watch. She seemed confused, smaller somehow, parroting phrases that were clearly Mark's words. When Dana asked her about the lock change, she said, Mark said it was for security. Security from your own daughter? Mark said she was unstable. Did you believe that? Mom looked at me for the first time in months. Really looked at me. I don't know anymore. Judge Morrison recessed for only 30 minutes. When she returned, her expression was stern. I've reviewed the evidence, and my decision is clear. The property at 42 Maple Street belongs solely to Hannah Porter. The defendants are ordered to vacate immediately. Relief flooded through me, but she wasn't done. Furthermore, Mr. Benson is ordered to pay $87,000 in damages for the destroyed property and unauthorized sales. As for the bigamy issue, I'm referring that to the district attorney. Mark stood up, face purple. This is ridiculous. I invested. Sit down, Mr. Benson, Judge Morrison commanded. You invested nothing. You destroyed, you stole, and you defrauded 2 women. Consider yourself lucky, Ms. Porter isn't pursuing criminal charges. She turned to Mom. Mrs. Porter, or Mrs. Benson, or whatever you're calling yourself, you're a victim here too. But you're also complicit. You chose this man over your daughter. You allowed him to destroy your late husband's legacy. That's something you'll have to live with. The gavel came down with finality. The courtroom cleared slowly. Mark stormed out, his attorney trailing behind. Already on the phone, presumably with criminal defense lawyers, Jason and Melissa slunk away. Their social media bravado evaporated. Mom stood frozen in place, staring at me. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, might acknowledge what she'd done. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and walked past me without a word. Outside the courthouse, neighbors and friends gathered around me. Mr. Nguyen shook my hand. Mrs. Patterson hugged me. Uncle Tom clapped me on the shoulder. Your dad would be proud, he said. But I wasn't looking at them. I was watching Mom get into an Uber alone. Mark having abandoned her the moment things went bad. She looked small, defeated, lost. Part of me wanted to call out to her, but Dana's hand on my arm stopped me. Give her time, she said. She needs to figure out who she is without someone telling her. 3 hours later, I stood in my house, my father's house, for the first time in months. Mark's things were already gone. He'd sent movers the moment we'd left for court. The damage was worse up close. Cheap paint over hand-carved wood. Vinyl where there should be copper. Particle board where there had been oak. I walked into Dad's workshop, empty now except for the built-in workbench they couldn't move. Running my hand along its scarred surface, I could almost hear his voice. Buildings outlive us, Hannah. The restoration would take months, maybe years, but I had time. I had resources. Most importantly, I had the will to rebuild what they'd tried to destroy. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, but I recognized the words. They were Mom's. I'm staying with Patricia. I'm sorry. Just that. No explanation, no real apology, no asking for forgiveness, but it was something. I deleted the message and called the contractor. When can you start? Tomorrow, he said. We'll bring it all back. Hannah, every detail your father created. I smiled, standing in the empty workshop. Good. Let's begin. The morning after the trial. I arrived at the house before dawn. The street was quiet. Peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. No Jason blasting music from the workshop. No Melissa complaining about the neighborhood. No Mark barking orders at contractors. Just the sound of birds and the distant hum of the city waking up. I used my original key. The locksmith had changed everything back the night before. A small but symbolic victory. The door opened to devastation, but also to possibility. Every ruined surface, every painted-over detail was a chance to honor Dad's memory by restoring what he'd loved. The contractor, Pete Morrison, arrived at 7 with his crew. He'd worked with Dad on several projects and understood what we were trying to accomplish. We found something, he said, leading me to the dining room, where Mark had installed cheap laminate. They'd pulled up a corner to assess the damage. Underneath, protected by layers of subflooring, Dad's salvaged church floors were intact. He built protection into the restoration, Pete explained, running his hand over the old wood. Like he knew someone might try to destroy it someday. Your dad was brilliant. Hannah, he made this house destruction-proof at its core. We found more of Dad's foresight as we worked. The built-in bookcases that had been painted. He'd used a special primer that allowed for easy stripping without damaging the wood underneath. The load-bearing walls had hidden steel reinforcements that prevented Mark's demolition attempts from causing real structural damage. Even the workshop, beneath Jason's gym equipment bolted to the walls, showed Dad's planning. He'd installed a secondary wall surface, preserving the original structure beneath. 3 weeks into restoration, Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door with a cardboard box. "I've been collecting," she said. Inside were Dad's tools that neighbors had bought at the garage sale and returned. His Japanese chisels, his grandfather's hand plane, his favorite hammer with the worn handle. We all knew Robert. We couldn't let his legacy disappear. By the end of the month, 17 boxes of Dad's belongings had been returned. The community that Mark had tried to deceive had quietly worked to undo the damage. The workshop was the first room we completed. I insisted on doing some of the work myself, sanding the workbench by hand, replacing the pegboard, reorganizing the tools in the same pattern Dad had used. When it was done, it looked exactly as it had the day he died. Except for one addition. I framed his letter to me and hung it where he used to hang his project schedules. Mark's legal troubles made the local news. The bigamy charge, the fraud investigation, the civil suits from both Patricia and Mom. He fled to Arizona, leaving behind debts and broken promises. Jason and Melissa disappeared from social media entirely after being sued by several garage sale buyers for selling stolen goods. The last I heard, they were living in Mark's cramped condo, fighting over who had to get a job first. Mom never came back to Portland. Aunt Patricia told me she was getting therapy, working through not just Mark's deception, but years of decisions that had led her there. She'd started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping other women who'd been conned by men like Mark. It was something, even if it wasn't enough to bridge the gap between us. 6 months after winning the house back, I hosted a restoration celebration. Everyone who'd helped came, the neighbors who'd returned tools, the contractors who'd worked below cost. Uncle Tom, who'd supported me when the rest of the family hadn't. We filled the house with laughter and stories about Dad, the way it should have been filled all along. Pete raised a beer in the workshop. To Robert Porter, who built better than he knew. That night, after everyone left, I sat in Dad's chair in his study, now restored to its original glory. The built-in bookcases gleamed with fresh polish. The original hardwood floors reflected the warm light from his desk lamp. I opened a package that had arrived that morning. Mom had sent Dad's wedding ring, the one Mark had tried to pawn but couldn't because it was engraved. No note, just the ring. I slipped it onto my thumb, too big for any other finger, and picked up a restoration journal I'd started. On the first page, I'd written Dad's words. "Buildings outlive us. Hannah, when you put your heart into something solid, something real, it stands long after you're gone." Below that, I now added, and sometimes they stand even when people try to tear them down. I looked around the room, at the walls that had witnessed betrayal and triumph, at the bones of a house that had proved stronger than the forces trying to destroy it. Dad had built more than a house. He'd built a fortress that protected itself, even from beyond the grave. Standing in his workshop one last time before bed, I ran my hand along the workbench where he'd taught me everything that mattered, not just about wood and stone, but about integrity, about standing firm when the world tries to shake your foundation. "I kept my promise, Dad," I whispered to the empty room that still smelled faintly of sawdust and possibility. I protected it all. The house seemed to settle around me, beams creaking gently like an old friend sighing in contentment. I turned off the workshop light and headed upstairs to my childhood bedroom, now mine again in every way that mattered. The last text from Mom had come that afternoon. "I see him in you, that's why it hurts so much." I didn't reply. Some bridges, once burned, leave gaps too wide to cross. But others, the ones built with care and craft and love, stand forever, no matter who tries to tear them down. Dad was right. Buildings outlive us. But more than that, love, real love, the kind that builds instead of destroys, outlives everything. The house stood solid around me, every beam and board a testament to that truth. And in the morning, I would wake up home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up for what's rightfully yours against family? I'd love to hear your experiences.